Ancient texts tell us that human beings used to live for more than 800 years. Does this prove that pre-flood civilizations were real? Let's take a look. Taman Chan. In ancient Mesoamerica, civilizations had a slightly different version of heaven than their Christian counterparts in Europe. For many groups living throughout Mexico, including the Aztec and Maya, they believed in a place called Taman Chan. It was both a paradise and potentially the home of a pre-flood civilization. Taman Chan was a mythical realm that a person could reach upon their death. Not only was Taman Chan a beautiful afterlife that people looked forward to their whole lives, but it was also the home of the gods. Mexican cultures believed that Taman Chan was the birthplace of all humanity. This mystical place was where humans first entered the world and where their spirits went when they died. It also may have been a place in the real world where an advanced civilization thrived centuries before the Aztec or the Maya. Juan de Tovar was a Jesuit priest who wrote an exceptional chronicle on the beliefs of the Mesoamerican people. While most of the Spanish were trying to erase the ancient history, the Jesuit was trying to preserve it. In his book, the Tovar Codex, he described Taman Chan as the Aztec version of the Garden of Eden. In Aztec mythology, getting to this place of paradise wasn't an easy feat. After a person died, they awoke in the dark and dreary underworld known as Xibalba. They had to fight through demons and restless spirits, as well as a series of supernatural worlds. And only then did they arrive at Taman Chan. It was a whole ordeal, one that could only be completed by the most fearless of people. If Taman Chan was a real place, where was it and what happened to it? Researcher Alfredo Lopez Austin has suggested that Taman Chan was in Cuernavaca or Iztactepetl, but other historians think Taman Chan was closer to the Gulf Coast. It's believed that Taman Chan was the original home of the Aztec. It may have been the homeland of a mighty civilization that was destroyed by an unknown cataclysmic event, most likely a flood. And now for a quick break. I wanted to give a big thank you to Hi Senpai and Creative Millionaire for supporting this channel. Thank you so much! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family, because why not? The real Olympians. The gods of ancient Olympus may have been based on a real group of powerful people who came from an advanced society before the worldwide flood. Scholars have suggested that the goddess Athena may have actually been Noah's daughter-in-law. In a lot of ancient religions, gods are depicted as great beings with supernatural features. In Egypt, the gods are anthropomorphic. They are spliced with animals like Horus, the hawk god. And in India, the gods are incredible beings with too many arms and outrageous powers. In Greek mythology, though, the gods of Olympus are ordinary people. They do have powers, great powers, to make mortals shudder, but they look like ordinary folk. Zeus was a man who could hurl thunderbolts, and Athena was an extremely intelligent woman. Countless idols across the Mediterranean prove that the Greek gods were modeled after normal men and women over 2,500 years ago. Some historians believe this may have been because the Greek gods were real people of flesh and blood. Specifically, the gods may have been the ancient ancestors of the Greeks from a time before Greek society. Athena in particular was of great importance to the Greek people. Her name appears in the oldest written Greek known to scholars, a type of writing called Linear B. In these ancient texts, she's referred to as Athanatos, which translates to the Immortal One. According to the Bible, there was a world before the flood. It was an epic place with big cities and advanced cultures, but the cultures were sinful, which was why God wiped them out with a flood. Even if you take God out of the equation, ancient records from around the globe suggest that there was a flood that destroyed an ancient society. The people before the flood lived significantly longer than the people who came after the flood. For example, Noah, the one who built the ark, lived for 950 years. After Noah and his sons, people started living shorter lives. Whatever had made the antediluvian people live so long, it was erased with the flood that swept across the world. People like Noah and his immediate relatives who lived for so long would have been immortalized by the newly risen societies. To the men and women only living a few decades, Noah and his offspring would have seemed like immortal gods. And this is where the whole thing with the Olympians and Athena comes into play. Scholars have suggested that Athena was really Nama, the wife of Noah's son Ham. The book of Genesis claims that Nama was the daughter of Lamech, who ruled the Canaanites prior to the flood. When the flood waters receded and society began again, Athena, aka Nama, existed in society for nearly 1,000 years. It's no wonder that the Greeks saw her as a deity. They could have based all the Olympians around the long-living descendants of Noah and the pre-flood world. What do you think of this story? Let me know in the comments. The Paracas skulls. Over 300 elongated skulls have been found in Peru's Paracas Desert. While mainstream scientists claim that the skulls are from a human society who practiced cranial deformation, not everyone agrees. The skulls may have been from a much older civilization who mixed their genes with aliens. Elongated skulls aren't unusual to find. They've been located all across the world, from South America to Egypt. But the Paracas skulls are unique. The first one was found by Julio Tello in 1928. They are larger than other elongated skulls found in different parts of the world. Scientists also say they contain unknown strands of DNA. There have been many tests done on the skulls since there are so many of them, and the tests all seem to indicate that structurally, they aren't entirely human. But first, let's dive into the mainstream theory. The accepted explanation for the strange skulls is cranial deformation. An infant's head was deformed on purpose using 2 pieces of wood. The child's head was basically stuck between some boards until it grew into an elongated shape. Archaeologists say this was no different than modern tattoos or piercing because it was a body modification. It was a practice that had something to do with spiritual belief or social status. And maybe that's true, but these skulls have so much more going on. For example, tests have shown that the Paracas skulls belonged to people who had red or blonde hair. This is crazy because no other people in South America were known to have had any other color of hair besides black and brown. They were totally different from everyone else. There is no definitive conclusion to the mystery. Some believe the skulls are evidence of Nephilim, the unholy abominations from the Bible created before the flood. But others think they are proof that aliens experimented with gene splicing thousands of years ago. The skulls may be evidence that extraterrestrials created a mixed race of humans and aliens. Did humans land here first? Göbekli Tepe is one of the few pieces of archaeological evidence to support an advanced civilization before the flood. That's because it's a megalithic temple that was built using sophisticated engineering techniques 6,000 years before Stonehenge. If you're into pre-flood civilizations, you've likely heard of Göbekli Tepe already. Göbekli Tepe was discovered in the 1960s, buried beneath farmland in Turkey. This site is about 6 miles from Urfa and is dated to roughly 9,500 BC. Amazingly, it's anywhere between 11,000 and 12,000 years old. But what's inside the site itself? It isn't evidence of a vast city, but rather of a society who worked together when other humans lived in caves. Archaeologists have unveiled megaliths, stone monuments, and ritual circles. There are pillars decorated in anthropomorphic gods, so the site appears to be religious in nature. It looks like a pagan temple, or like any ancient stone circle in Europe. The problem is that it's so much older. It dates to around the same time biblical scholars say the flood took place. Even in the world of mainstream science, Göbekli Tepe is hotly contested. Nobody can agree on who built it or what it was used for. When Klaus Schmidt investigated the ruins in 1963, he called Göbekli Tepe the first temple in the world. He believed it was a place of worship for groups of nomadic hunters. But others think Göbekli Tepe was the real Garden of Eden, the physical location where Adam and Eve were created by God. As of 2021, only 5% of this site had been fully excavated. A site that could prove a civilization existed before a massive flood has hardly even been explored. Then there's the bizarre twist of Karahan Tepe, a nearly identical site that was found nearby. This other site is roughly the same age, maybe even older. So how many more sites are there from 12,000 years ago that haven't been found? The Hobbits. In 2003, scientists discovered an entirely new species of human on an Indonesian island. This ancient species of human was likely part of a unique civilization tens of thousands of years ago, and some think they could still be hiding in the jungles of Asia. The discovery was made on the island of Flores, a beautiful but wild place. A series of bones were identified as belonging to a previously unknown human species. The species was named Homo floresiensis. The unique thing about them is that they were really short, only growing to a maximum of 3'7". They've been nicknamed hobbits because they resembled hobbits from the Lord of the Rings. They were even extremely hairy, just like Tolkien's hobbits. By dating the ancient bones, scientists were able to determine that the last of the hobbits died out around 54,000 years ago. Scientists at Flinders University were able to connect the DNA of the hobbits to Homo habilis, another ancient relative of modern humans. The baffling thing is that they only appear on an island in Indonesia. So how did a whole species end up only living on the island of Flores? Did they migrate from Africa? Were there other groups of hobbits in other places whose bones haven't been found? And an even more important question is this: how many unique human species existed tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago? The Indonesian hobbits likely weren't technologically advanced. They were small and simplistic, though likely quite intelligent. Locals on the island tell tales of ape-like humanoids, which they believe could be thriving in untouched parts of the jungle. It's possible that they've even moved underground, becoming a race of deep-dwelling hominids. Pre-flood human fossils. One of the biggest questions you might be asking yourself is, if there was a civilization before the flood, where are their fossils? If there was a flood that destroyed a global civilization, it would have been an enormous flood. A flood of that magnitude would have destroyed everything living at the time. Underwater mud flows would have been powerful enough to grind human bones into powder. Anyone alive, and likely any city standing, would have been completely obliterated. So there wouldn't be any evidence left. Humans already have very low fossilization potential, and when you add catastrophic geological processes to the mix, there is an almost 0% chance of finding buried human bones. There's also an extremely low chance of finding a surviving structure from before the flood. Göbekli Tepe may have been found simply because it was on a tall hill, which before the flood may have been a mountaintop. There's another interesting point that's often overlooked. Prior to the flood, the population would have been very small. In the book of Genesis, the Bible says the earth was filled with violence. There was likely a civilization, maybe even more than one, but the populations were small, leaving even less for modern archaeologists to find and research. The Great Aidu. According to ancient Babylonian legend, Eridu was the first city that was ever established on the planet. It was built by the gods long before the flood swept away civilization. The city of Eridu belonged to Enki, the ancient Anunnaki god of wisdom and magic. The myths of Mesopotamia claim that Enki was the sole deity responsible for planet Earth. He was by himself until his brother Enlil showed up, and only then did civilization start to spread. Eridu rose in the desert south of the Euphrates River. It was a real place, confirmed by a series of sandy hills and a poorly preserved pyramid. There were 4 other major cities built by the Anunnaki prior to the flood. Ancient Sumerian texts claim that the 5 cities were ruled by 8 kings for around 800 to 1,000 years. Just like Noah and his family from the Bible, the early kings of Sumer lived insanely long. So, could they have been related? Many scholars find it strange that only in the cradle of civilization did people supposedly live for upwards of 800 years. It feels like more than a myth, especially since Eridu is still around, albeit in ruins. The oldest structures are about 5,500 years old, making researchers think that earlier traces of habitation were wiped away by the flood. The myths of the world. If you're not convinced yet of a pre-flood civilization, let me take you through the flood myths of the old world. From Asia to South America, ancient cultures claimed that a flood destroyed their civilizations. In India, Lord Vishnu appeared to a man named Manu and warned him of a flood that was about to come. Vishnu told the human to collect all the grains of the world and store them in a boat. That way, when the flood waters receded, he could regrow the lost plants. The story is almost identical to the one from the Bible, only it's plants instead of animals. In Welsh legend, the creature Afanc caused a massive flood that left only 2 human survivors. The 2 survivors also constructed a boat, just like an ark, that carried 1 pair of every species of animal available. The Choctaw tribes of North America used to tell stories of the great water that rolled over the mountains and spread across the land. The epic flood destroyed everything and everyone, leaving only a few families left who had constructed a giant raft to stay safe. In Hawaii, Nu'u was the ark builder. He constructed a boat to escape an incredible deluge, and when the floodwaters receded, his boat rested on top of Mauna Kea. It's also said that Nu praised the moon for his survival. All over the world, it seems like every civilization has a myth or a story about a great flood. Is it all just coincidence? Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Cahokia. What is today nothing but mounds of green grass near St. Louis, Missouri, was once the site of the largest ever pre-Columbian settlement anywhere north of the Mexican border. It was occupied from between 800 and 1400 AD, consisting of at least 120 mounds during its peak. At the time, it was one of the greatest cities in the world, even larger than London was in the year 1250. The culture occupied much of the Mississippi Valley, and each mound had its own purpose. For example, there were mounds used for public buildings and for burials. Archaeologists even discovered an astronomical observatory built of wooden posts that they dubbed Woodhenge. Yet despite so much archaeological evidence collected by the experts, we still don't really know a lot about the ancient Mississippian civilization or what happened to them. Like many of the other pre-urban societies of North America, they vanished between 1300 and 1400, leaving no evidence behind as to why they left or where they went. The Saningdui Aliens. The Saningdui ruins were discovered in 1929 in China's Sichuan province, completely by accident. The story goes, a peasant was repairing a sewage ditch when he uncovered jade and stone artifacts. But their importance wasn't really understood until 30 years later, when archaeologists uncovered 2 pits of Bronze Age treasures, including more jade figurines, 100 elephant tusks, and enormous bronze sculptures measuring 8 feet tall. The treasures were broken and buried, indicating they were destroyed as sacrifice. But who were these people? Now known as the Saningdui, scientists still don't know much about this mysterious ancient society. There are rumors that these statues and sculptures actually depict aliens. Of course, this is not likely the case, and Chinese archaeologists have strongly refuted any theory that the ancient culture was in contact with extraterrestrial beings. They are actually pretty offended by it. And yet scientists can't explain the bizarre figurines found both at the Saningdui ruins and at the less famous Erlitou site in China's Henan province. There are a lot more questions than answers, which is why conspiracy theorists are trying to fill in the blanks. Archaeologists better hurry up. These statues and masks depict humanoid beings with huge heads, pointy ears, and enlarged eyeballs. They could certainly be artistic representations of some kind of deity, perhaps a god or a family of gods. The similarity between the figurines from the 2 different archaeological sites suggests that the civilizations may have communicated with each other. What's truly interesting about the Saningdui ruins is that no texts of any kind have been found at the site. Some have speculated that writing could have been made on organic material like cloth or silk, meaning that all of it has decayed since the mysterious civilization vanished. We know nothing specific about their practices or what they believed in. Perhaps earthquakes and landslides are to blame for their demise. An enormous catastrophe may have cut off their water supply, forcing them to move. But the question is, where did they go? And why did they not re-emerge somewhere else? The Utopian Indus. Historians have wanted to know for a very long time how the Indus civilization flourished for 700 years without crafting a single piece of weaponry, and with no evidence of kings or queens, indicating that the society may have been run by elected officials. According to historical texts, the Indus civilization was paradise on Earth. The issue is that nobody can figure out why. The Indus civilization was one of 4 major players at the beginning of the kingdoms on Earth. Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and ancient China were all glorified in warfare, but those who lived in the Indus Valley functioned as a utopia from between 2600 and 1900 BC, never succumbing to violence or bloodshed like the other civilizations around them. There have been at least 1,000 settlements discovered in what was once the Indus territory, a huge swath of land covering much of Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. Today, experts agree that the Indus civilization likely built the bones of what would become the Indian civilization, and they probably created Hinduism. Archaeologists know that the Indus society was quite advanced. The famous city of Mohenjo-daro was made by skilled builders and urban planners, but there are no temples, palaces, or monuments, no obvious central seat of government. Everything was organized and clean. There was a system of seals and weights to control the exchange of goods, and they specialized in export and trade. But most impressive, perhaps, was the control over water. There were sewage systems, drainage systems, toilets, bathing areas in each house, and even small pools. One theory is that their ideology was cleanliness. There is also evidence of the city being quite wealthy, with artifacts such as ivory, lapis, carnelian, and gold beads, as well as the baked brick city structures themselves. However, the cities of the Indus Valley civilization don't show signs of fortification. Were they non-violent? Did they not have enemies? Perhaps their lack of military led to their decline. They couldn't defend themselves and were probably annihilated, though nobody has any clue who wiped them out or how it happened. The Stonehenge Builders. Stonehenge is one of the most iconic archaeological and historical sites in the world. But who really built Stonehenge? They are known as the Builders, but even though this place is perhaps one of the most studied places on Earth, there is still much we don't know about what Stonehenge really is, or the people who made it. It was definitely a burial ground and had great spiritual and religious significance. It took a lot of people a lot of effort to build this place between 3000 and 2000 BC, and some of the stones were brought from hundreds of miles away. Archaeologists are still debating what Stonehenge represents. Its alignment with the stars and the human remains indicate it had a lot to do with the dead and with astronomy, serving as a type of calendar. It also appears to have been a very important gathering place for ancient people. A popular belief is that Stonehenge was built by Druid priests, or perhaps by the wizard Merlin himself. Most recent DNA analysis shows that ancestors of the people who built Stonehenge traveled west across the Mediterranean to get to Britain. Neolithic Britons were farmers and had dark skin and blue or green eyes, and brought the tradition of building monuments using large stones. Towards the end of the Neolithic era, the farmers were replaced by another new population known as the Bell Beaker people, who migrated from inland Europe. They had lighter skin with dark eyes. Something happened, and the Neolithic cultures began to collapse. The cliff-dwelling Anasazi. The Anasazi people, or the ancestral Puebloans, are famous for their entire villages or pueblos built into cliffs. They lived in what is now the current Four Corners region of the United States, most famously Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. The name Anasazi actually comes from the Navajo Indians and loosely translates to mean enemy ancestors. This ancient Native American civilization lived in sandstone dwellings carved deep into secluded canyons. The ruins here are in abundance, with many saying that the Anasazi were one of the greatest Neolithic civilizations anywhere in America. To this day, there are still giant towers left over and huge ceremonial chambers with ceilings that weigh up to 90 tons. They could only be reached by climbing and were fortified against enemies. They created roads and irrigation systems for watering their crops and used colorful pottery, woven baskets, and sandstone to decorate their homes, greatly influencing what Southwest style means today. The Anasazi civilization lived in this area for over 1,000 years, but in a single generation, they were gone. Between 1275 and 1300 AD, they stopped building entirely, and the land was left empty. They are often compared to the Maya in the sense that they were an advanced civilization that was prosperous, healthy, advanced in arts and science, and nobody knows why they disappeared. Scientists have no idea where they went, why they abandoned their capital, or what kind of unseen force may have played a part in their great exodus. The theory is that an extreme drought hit the desert area and they were forced to leave. Looking for the rain, it is rumored that they headed south, leaving trails of pottery and architecture along the way. The Canaanites. The Canaanite civilization is mentioned multiple times in the Bible. It is one of the most mysterious ancient societies that we know almost nothing about. That is, until recently, when new archaeological evidence revealed that the ancient Canaanites may have crafted the earliest pieces of an alphabet that we still use today. Archaeologists investigating the old Canaanite settlement of Lachish discovered a pottery shard dating back 3,500 years, inscribed with what they say is the oldest text anywhere in Israel, written using an alphabetic script. Earlier texts have been found from the Canaanite civilization, but they were written using hieroglyphics or other outdated methods. What this discovery has done is fill a gap in the earliest history of the written word. From what scientists can understand, Canaanite migrants developed the alphabet in ancient Egypt. This is the very alphabet that would spread around the world and ultimately become what is used today in English, Spanish, French, and many other languages. The pottery fragment itself was probably imported from Cyprus and was written on with ink in the earliest Canaanite alphabet. Scientists have not been able to decipher the short text, nor have they been able to figure out how the Canaanites managed to go from hieroglyphics to an actual alphabet. The Hittite Civilization. An archaeological discovery made over 100 years ago has been the source of some recent controversy. It involves the ancient biblical society of the Hittites, with experts now saying that proof of the Hittite civilization validates the historical record of the Bible, seeing as the Hittites are mentioned repeatedly throughout both the Hebrew and Christian Bibles. Historians have argued for many years over the existence of the Hittite, or at least their relationship with the biblical scripts. There simply hasn't been enough archaeological evidence to prove they ever existed. The Hittites were mentioned in the Old Testament at least 50 times. Then, in the early 1900s, German archaeologist Hugo Winkler heard of mysterious clay tablets found by looters in Turkey. He organized excavations in the area between 1906 and 1912, finding sculptures, temples, and a fortified tower. Even though the German archaeologists believed these ruins belonged to the Hittite civilization, there was no definitive proof. It wasn't until Hugo discovered what he believed was once a royal archive room filled with over 10,000 ancient clay tablets that the truth came to life. These tablets were deciphered by a Czech professor at the University of Vienna in 1915, at which point it was announced to the world that this ancient site was once the capital city of the Hittite kingdom, and that they had been known throughout history by another name, the Hattusha. But here's where the controversy, skepticism, and doubt came into play. Even though this discovery was made so long ago, people still argue against the Hittite culture ever being represented in the Bible. Some claim the Bible is talking about a completely different civilization of people with a similar name. Unfortunately, there is no way to tell which civilization is depicted in the Bible. Scientists don't even know what became of these people, where they came from, or why their capital was abandoned. Neolithic salt miners. Way before Stonehenge, people in Neolithic Britain were already mining salt. That's how important salt has been to humans. A new discovery of an extremely old salt processing site in the United Kingdom has archaeologists saying that whoever lived in Britain way before Stonehenge was built may have been the first salt miners anywhere in Europe. Called salterns, there have been several found in continental Europe, mostly in Poland and the Balkans, dating back to the Iron Age. This salt mine dates back to 3,800 BC and was found at a coastal hilltop archaeological site near Loftus. Archaeologists uncovered a trench with broken shards of pottery, 3 hearths, and evidence of a storage pit. Some of the pieces of pottery still contain salt deposits. All the evidence points to salt processing. According to Steve Sherlock, the archaeologist who was in charge of the dig, the people who used this mine for processing salt were probably pioneers and the first in the United Kingdom to clear forests to build settlements. Pottery found here was introduced by people who migrated from northern France about 4000 BC, and they are the ones that most likely brought the salt mining know-how. But like pretty much every group of Neolithic people anywhere in the world 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, we don't really know who they were. We do know that salt would have been a rare and highly valuable commodity at the time, as it allowed foodstuffs to be preserved for use throughout the winter. Other structures found at the site indicate that it was a wealthy and thriving community. The unknown kingdom of King Hartapu. In a very rare occurrence, archaeologists in Turkey have discovered a civilization previously unknown to historians. According to Professor James Osborne, an archaeologist who specializes in Iron Age cities, nobody had any idea about the ancient kingdom. They discovered it in 2019, when a farmer told the group of archaeologists that he found a piece of stone with strange writing on it in a nearby canal. It was clear the group was standing at an ancient site that had been lost to time. While they couldn't begin excavations immediately, James Osborne was able to get the curious stone tablet translated. The writing on the tablet was nothing short of shocking. It turned out to be some kind of military boast, written by someone named King Hartapu. Nobody had ever heard of this guy before, yet the stone told of a great military victory over the kingdom of Phrygia led by the infamous King Midas. It's true that Phrygia had been ruled by many different kings who went by the name of Midas. But dating of the stone corresponds to the time in which the true King Midas, the one who turned things to gold with his touch, ruled over Phrygia. Phrygia was a powerhouse kingdom, and defeating it would have taken a significant force. It's hard to believe that historians had never heard of this kingdom before. But thanks to King Hartapu and King Midas, they were not entirely lost to history. Researchers are, of course, excited to learn more and piece together the ancient puzzle. The Anunnaki gods. Who are the Anunnaki? Anyone obsessed with mysterious ancient civilizations knows that the Anunnaki are at the very top of the list when it comes to the unknown. Depending on who you ask, the Anunnaki can be one of many things. Some claim they were the gods of the Sumerian civilization that existed from 4100 to 1750 BC, as is suggested by stone artifacts and ancient depictions left behind. The Sumerians were the first civilization on Earth to divide time into hours and minutes, putting them at the forefront of human advancement. It makes sense that they also came up with one of the first complex religions featuring a pantheon of powerful deities. But wait just a minute, because some believe that the Anunnaki were not simply gods made up out of thin air by the Sumerians. There is a popular theory that says the Anunnaki were actually a civilization of their own. Some claim they were living, breathing beings. Of course, these same people believe that the Anunnaki were an ancient civilization of space travelers who came to Earth to enslave the human race, beginning with the Sumerians. But whether the Anunnaki were indeed a civilization of their own, possibly a society of reptilian humanoids that played a crucial role in advancing humankind, or if they were just mythological deities, well, science has no way of knowing, at least not until they come back and finish what they started. Secrets under Machu Picchu. The true complexity of Machu Picchu has remained hidden from archaeologists. The ruins of the ancient citadel and what you see in photographs are only a small piece of the puzzle. These ruins are located high in the mountains, and they are sitting on a peak that's unobstructed by pesky foliage. However, there is a lot more to the landscape here, but most of it is covered by thick forests. Luckily though, researchers recently discovered forgotten structures among these sprawling ruins by using drones and lasers. About a dozen small structures were found within 5 miles of the main remnants of Machu Picchu, the Inca city constructed in the 15th century. They were found on the outskirts of Cochabamba, the old ceremonial site near the city. Scientists used LiDAR technology, which stands for light detection and ranging, to bounce lasers off the surface and see the contours beneath the jungle. This revealed more structures in Cochabamba, reinforcing what archaeologists already knew. That's to say that Machu Picchu was once an extremely important place. You knew that already. You could only reach the city in the sky if you were very important. You had to have special permission to journey to the peak of the mountain and gaze at the surrounding landscape in Machu Picchu. However, before you started your journey, you had to stop in Cochabamba. This was where you had a spiritual bath to cleanse your soul. The ritual baths were fueled by water flowing from the Urubamba River. Archaeologists have always had a difficult time studying the ceremonial center because it's mostly overgrown with much of the site covered in trees. But thanks to laser technology, archaeologists are finally starting to see the full scope of the ancient site. Deciphering ancient languages. There are countless languages that nobody has spoken in thousands of years, but every one of these lost languages might be on the cusp of being deciphered. A team of researchers from MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory are using an AI program that can automatically decipher any unknown language. This new technology is able to do this without knowledge of the civilization that created the language. Without doing anything at all, the AI can automatically translate just about anything. Researchers say their goal is to uncover lost languages that historians have found written records of, but that nobody has been able to speak. This new technology is incredible for archaeologists and will lead to some amazing discoveries. Researchers used a decipherment algorithm which understands the predictable patterns of human language. The algorithm then figured out how to categorize words from any language and link them to related languages. It's not exactly like Google Translate, like from Spanish to English, but it's not that far off either. Here's an example of how the technology is already working. The algorithm was able to correctly identify the general language family of Iberian. This was the language spoken by the people of Western Europe beginning around the 7th century BC. The AI program isolated the language and learned the other sub-languages in its family tree. Now, the scientists are just hoping that they can use the AI to master every language that's ever been written. Lost Maya pyramids. Ancient cities and pyramids from the days of the Maya Empire have been unearthed in Guatemala thanks to lasers. Researchers rained down laser pulses across 770 square miles of extraordinarily dense Guatemalan forest. This immense survey revealed an unbelievable number of Maya structures. Researchers didn't just find a couple of pyramids and temples, some forgotten city streets, or a crumbling palace. What they found was over 60,000 structures making up an entire landscape. The lasers revealed what the ancient Maya world looked like before it was swallowed by the jungle 1,000 years ago. Thomas Garrison from Ithaca College called the discovery a game changer. He says it completely alters how people in the future will study Maya archaeology. The new technology provided an unprecedented view of the structures and how the civilization worked. They identified vast agricultural infrastructure, along with dense urban areas. The data shows that this part of Guatemala was about 4 times more populated than anyone had thought. Garrison estimates that there were at least 10 million people living here, compared to the paltry population of 2.5 million people researchers originally thought there were. As of early 2023, this is the largest laser survey ever completed. It allowed scientists to accomplish decades of research in a single afternoon. Garrison was part of a team that spent 8 years mapping an area of less than 1 square mile at a site called El Sots. But now, a plane with some lasers can map 67 square miles in just an hour. This new technology really is the future of archaeology. Scotland's subterranean mysteries. During the Iron Age, ancient people in Scotland and in other parts of Europe dug deep underground tunnels called souterrains. Over 500 of these subterranean passages have been identified in the Scottish Highlands. But what stumped archaeologists for decades is that nobody knows what their function was. Some experts believe the tunnels were used as storage cellars for keeping perishable food items like meats and cheeses. Archaeologist Matt Ritchie with Forestry and Land Scotland says they could have been used for storing grain or for keeping valuables safe. He believes there is even a possibility that they stored slaves and hostages in the tunnels. It wasn't all that unusual for people in the Iron Age to take hostages from rival villages and trade them for goods. But the hard truth is that we just don't know what the souterrains were used for. There's also a theory that they were made specifically for rituals held underground. They could have been like shrines or chapels for some primitive religion. In 2022, researchers began to investigate the subterranean tunnels using lasers. They focused on the Crackney souterrain, which is about 42 feet long. A small entrance leads to a sloping corridor with walls made from dry slabs and a ceiling of overlapping stones. Researchers then used an advanced precision imaging laser scanner to create a 3-dimensional image of the tunnel's interior. They were hoping the 3D graphics would help them to better understand what the tunnel was used for. But in all honesty, it hasn't really helped much. They were able to perfectly map the ancient tunnel, but they are still nowhere close to figuring out what the ancient people used it for. Any guesses? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The manners of the Snake Dynasty. Scientists have been using laser technology in recent years to uncover the secrets of lost civilizations, particularly secrets of the Maya. In 2022, archaeologists used LiDAR technology to reveal shocking new details about the capital of Calakmul, the ancient seat of the fabled Mayan Snake Dynasty. The Snake Dynasty ruled a large part of the Maya Empire in Mexico between 635 and 850 AD, give or take a few years. Their capital was Calakmul, located deep in the forest of the Yucatan Peninsula. Researchers from the University of Calgary, with help from local archaeologists, scanned a massive area of uninhabited forest with lasers to see what they could find underneath the canopy. What they discovered was shocking. They found proof of city life sprawling into the distance. We've always known the capital was there, but now we have evidence of huge manors. These were large residential compounds that the researchers have compared to modern apartments. However, they weren't ordinary rentals. Archaeologists say they were the seats of massive households. Imagine your entire extended family living inside one ancient apartment complex. Each compound had its own temples, marketplaces, and shrines, making Calakmul one of the biggest cities in the Americas back in 700 AD. The discovery of these structures wouldn't have been possible without using lasers to search beneath centuries of overgrown jungle, and who knows what else they might find in the years to come. Robots and the sewers beneath the Coliseum. Archaeologists have been uncovering all kinds of treasures from the sewer networks beneath the Coliseum in Rome. Everything from snacks to animal bones have been found clogged up in the old sewage pipes. Researchers have always focused on the upper level of the Coliseum where the gladiators fought and exotic animals thrilled the crowds. But recently, they examined about 230 feet of sewer pipes and made even more unusual discoveries. They did this with the help of robots, sending remotely operated machines down into places where no human would dare to go. Think of the robots like the same ones used by bomb squads. Instead of a human wriggling through a greasy Roman sewage pipe, they just send the robot in. So far, the robots have helped find the bones of bears, cats, and dogs, and they've even uncovered snacks consumed by eager spectators. The robot uncovered seeds from figs, blackberries, grapes, and melons. There were some unidentified nuts found as well. The consensus here is that Romans really liked berries and nuts while they watched people kill each other with swords. However, there was all kinds of other stuff that got flushed down the sewers as well. Researchers came across coins, gaming dice made from bone, and even scraps of clothing. The truth is that the old Roman sewers weren't all that different from the modern sewers we have today. Humanoid dive bot. The future of archaeology isn't just lasers, it's also robotics. And scientists from Stanford University in the US have recently achieved something truly remarkable. They successfully sent an underwater robot, something they described as a robo-mermaid, to a sunken shipwreck to retrieve lost artifacts. It was a huge victory for robotics and archaeology and could be the beginning of many more expeditions. The shipwreck is that of La Lune, which sank off the coast of Toulon in 1664. It was the flagship of Louis XIV of France, and its destruction was devastating. It sank to about 300 feet, and only a handful of men survived. La Lune then sat on the bottom of the sea for almost 5 centuries, until the Ocean One robot came along and scooped up a vase the size of a grapefruit. The humanoid diving robot was operated using virtual reality. Professor Usama Khatib used joysticks like a video game to control the robot while sitting safely in a boat on the surface. The professor says the robo-mermaid is set to completely transform underwater exploration. Humans can easily maneuver the robot, and it can go where people can't. There is no danger of decompression sickness, no difficulties with an air supply, and it can even see better than most people. The robot only managed to retrieve one artifact during the expedition, but that's just the beginning. In the next few years, we could have entire groups of these robots pillaging sunken ships, searching for lost treasure. Ancient Florida. Drones and lasers have revealed an ancient settlement off the coast of Florida. Archaeologists from the University of Florida used aerial drones with LiDAR sensors attached to them in their newest adventure. These drones and their lasers were able to complete detailed maps of the surface of Riley Island. The maps revealed an ancient settlement from at least 1,100 years ago. It's important to note that archaeologists already knew there was an ancient human presence on the island. In 1990, archaeological objects were found, and in 2010, additional exploration revealed the presence of a settlement from about 900 AD. But by using lasers and drones, the archaeologists have now revealed totally unknown architectural details. They had tried to do this with their own measly eyes, but they had always come up short. So they turned to technology to look through the thick forest and see what was hiding just under the soil. In total, archaeologists identified 37 residential areas enclosed by huge ridges of oyster shells stretching 12 feet tall in some places. This was a bustling settlement of early Native Americans living in what was almost a fortified island town. What's even more amazing is that researchers also found evidence of bead manufacturing. Coastal Native American chiefs had a thirst for marine mollusks that could be turned into beads. They often had them imported from up and down the coastline so they could be turned into jewelry. These guys were probably the first to be wearing puka shell necklaces. Remember those from the 90s? Cleaning tombs with lasers. The ancient tomb of Neferhotep was discovered in the 19th century on the west bank of Luxor. Sadly, this ancient Egyptian tomb has been subjected to extreme damage because of poor caretaking. It's been polluted by trash and scarred by layers of soot and dirt. Many parts of the tomb have become so dirty, it's difficult to tell what was originally painted on them. This is a huge problem because the tomb is really impressive. It's a great piece of history. Built during the reign of Pharaoh I around 1320 BC, Neferhotep was an Egyptian official who held the position of chief scribe of Amun. But in the 19th century, nobody really cared who he was. The tomb was used for burning mummies, which many Egyptians viewed as trash before the big explosion of archaeology in the 20th century. The whole tomb is now covered in mummy ashes, along with dirt from the cattle that were kept inside the tomb as well. However, archaeologists have come to the rescue using the newest advances in technology. Researchers undertook a project to clean the tomb of Neferhotep using lasers. 3 German conservators used highly sensitive lasers to non-destructively clean the soot and dirt from ancient wall paintings and stone surfaces. The results speak for themselves. The conservators managed to remove the pollution and get the paintings back to their original vividness. This is great news for other ancient tombs across the world whose artwork has been dirtied by centuries of neglect. Roman wine. A new analysis of grape DNA has revealed some secrets about ancient Roman wine. It turns out the wine you buy from your local liquor store may be extremely similar to the wine Roman emperors were drinking 2,000 years ago. And while it's true that we've become more diverse when it comes to our selections of wine, there are still plenty of ancient wines that have been using the same vine for thousands of years. In order to learn more, Dr. Nathan Wales from the University of York used the newest DNA technology to look into the past. He and his team looked at grape seeds from 9 ancient sites in France and then compared them to modern grapes. The results they found weren't at all what they were expecting. What the researchers learned was out of the 28 seeds they studied, 16 were closely related to modern grapes. One was a direct match for the extremely rare Sauvignon Blanc in France, something that's been produced for around 900 years. There were also 2 seeds that were genetically identical to ones discovered at a Roman site hundreds of miles away, dating back 2,000 years. Researchers say these genetic links show just how advanced the techniques of ancient winemakers were. The cheap wine you find at the store is likely very similar, genetically speaking, to the wine consumed by the Romans. The baboon police. Ancient Egyptians were absolutely obsessed with animals. Their lives revolved around the worship of wild beasts. Not ordinary animals, but creatures they believed to be the physical manifestations of their favorite gods and goddesses. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was depicted as a baboon. Because of that, people treated baboons with intense reverence. They kept them as pets and mummified their remains. People treated baboons with the same respect they would treat a god. If they were rude or cruel to a baboon, Egyptians believed they were being cruel to a god and would be punished for it. In the ancient Hierakonpolis cemetery, archaeologists found the bones of baboons that were used as pets thousands of years ago. Egyptians were learning how to better control animals, especially primates, and it's highly likely that they taught them to perform human tasks. Scientists have found tons of ancient Egyptian artwork showing baboons doing human activities, things like harvesting fruit and helping in the production of alcohol. There are some examples of artwork that even show baboons doing hugely complicated tasks, such as rigging ships. There are also accounts of baboons acting as police officers to help catch criminals. Historians believe these primates could have been used for simple human tasks. They may have collected fruit, though they likely would have eaten a lot of it. But whether the Egyptians really trained monkeys to serve as police officers is still a mystery.
And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I wanted to say a big thank you to Da for the super thanks and for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day, and we wouldn't be here without you guys. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more videos like these.
The horror of Ragnarok. You've heard of Ragnarok, but do you know how the whole thing is supposed to unfold? The Vikings believed a series of calamities would precede Ragnarok, their own version of the apocalypse. Much like the end of times in the Bible, the Vikings had accepted the world would end and that it would be an ugly affair. According to Norse mythology, a great winter would kick off the apocalyptic events. Vikings believed the world would be covered in utter darkness, and that frigid winds would kill all the living creatures on the planet. Then a wolf would eat the sun. The wolf god Fenrir, realizing the end of everything was upon the world, would devour the sun and bring eternal darkness. In Ragnarok, just like in the Book of Revelation, the stars in the sky are all destroyed. There are a lot of parallels between the Viking apocalypse and the Christian one. For example, Christian doctrine says an antichrist will rise and plunge humanity into chaos. In the case of Ragnarok, Loki, who is far more sinister in myth than he's portrayed in the movies, breaks free of his prison. He then does everything within his power to help the apocalypse unfold. The world floods, the dead return like a zombie invasion, the gods die, and the world is consumed by fire. But likely the weirdest part of it all is that, at the end, only 2 humans remain. It's like Adam and Eve. Only 2 humans left after all else is destroyed to start anew. Abandoned Teotihuacan. The abandonment of Teotihuacan is one of the greatest mysteries of the Western world. The ancient city is 25 miles from Mexico City and is located in the central basin of Mexico. Its ruins have been studied for over a century, but scientists still don't know who built it, who ruled it, or why it was deserted. What the experts do know, thanks to archaeological investigations, is that Teotihuacan was founded near Lake Texcoco around 2,100 years ago. The ones most likely responsible for building the city is the inhabitants of nearby Cuicuilco. Around the year 50 BC, Cuicuilco was obliterated when the Xitle volcano erupted. It's believed they migrated a little north after the devastation and built the city of Teotihuacan. It flourished under their control for the next 600 years, but then it was abruptly abandoned in 650 AD. The seemingly unsolvable mystery here is why they abandoned Teotihuacan. The city looked fine. The pyramids and temples were massive and beautiful, and there were over an estimated 200,000 people who lived there. But then everyone just left. They never developed a system for writing like the Maya to the south did, but the culture had a complex religion and practiced ritual sacrifice. They had a mighty military that likely kept them safe from enemies, but for seemingly no reason, they abandoned the city. Archaeologists have found evidence of a fire that may have raged through Teotihuacan, but there is no reason they couldn't have rebuilt. Something happened that caused almost 250,000 people to flee into the Mexican wilderness, and to this day, we have no idea what it was. Queen Ankhesenamun. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, 2 of the most notorious rulers in Egyptian history. He was born in the 18th dynasty and took on the role of pharaoh in 1332 BC, at the young age of 9. Most history enthusiasts know the boy king's name, but his sister and wife, Ankhesenamun, isn't quite as famous. She appears briefly in the history books as being the 3rd of 6 daughters raised by Akhenaten, She was 13 years old when Tutankhamun was only 8 or 9, and when the boy took the throne, they were married. Some historians think she may have married Tutankhamun's successor, Ai, but the evidence isn't clear enough to prove that. She may have also been married to her own father, but that's just speculation. Inbreeding was a way of life for Egyptian royalty. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun were born of incest, as their mother and father were siblings. This likely resulted in both of them suffering from genetic conditions. Studying King Tut's remains has proved he had a cleft palate and a club foot. It's also believed he was so crippled from incest that when he tried to have a baby with his sister, he couldn't. Their tainted bloodline, which was thought to be pure at the time, spelled the end for this family. The siblings ruled Egypt together for 10 years before Tutankhamun died. The big historical mystery is that it's unclear what happened to the young queen afterward. She would have been in her early 20s and would have acted as the official queen of Egypt. A ring was found in the Valley of the Kings that depicts Ankhesenamun with Ai, the advisor who took the throne after Tutankhamun. Ai may have been her grandfather, whom she had no choice but to marry. To this day, the queen's tomb has never been found, but it's believed to still be out there somewhere in the hot desert sands. And hopefully, if it's ever located, scientists will finally learn the full story of one of history's most overlooked queens, the Throne of Curses. A Greek archaeologist recently found an ancient throne of curses. The throne, or at least the fragment of it discovered, belonged to the ancient kings of Mycenae. These were the Greek kings who waged war against Troy over 2,000 years ago. Christophilus Magidus claims his team found a piece of limestone underneath the ruined citadel of Mycenae in ancient Greece. The limestone was supposedly once part of a great seat of rulers, but there are other archaeologists who doubt the claim, saying the limestone chunk was from a basin meant for holding liquids. Still, Magidus maintains his assumption that it was a throne. If true, this will be the first time a Mycenaean throne has been discovered. These people ruled a huge part of Greece during the Bronze Age between the 14th and 12th centuries BC. They were a mighty house before they descended into anarchy and their city burned down. Mycenaean king Agamemnon, according to myth, led the forces of Greece against the city of Troy between 1194 and 1184 BC. Legend says that when Agamemnon returned home after the fighting, his wife and her lover murdered him, and from then on, the Mycenaean kings were cursed, and so too was their throne. Who built the pyramids? In a shocking new revelation, researchers are claiming the Great Pyramids of Giza weren't built by the Egyptians. Instead, the theory that's being thrown around now is that they were the result of a lost civilization. Jerry Cannon and Malcolm Hutton are the minds behind the theory. They say the Sphinx that stands guard before the pyramids was carved before there was any sand here. They've tried to date the Sphinx at 12,000 years old, but that would predate all the major civilizations of the planet. The researchers are claiming the pyramids and the Sphinx were built before the end of the Ice Age by a completely unknown civilization. This mysterious group would have lived in Egypt long before the Egyptians themselves. The theory doesn't have much going for it in the way of evidence, though. Cannon and Hutton say the pyramids may have been built by people from Atlantis. The timing does work, since Atlantis was supposedly destroyed 12,000 years ago, and the Atlanteans would have needed somewhere new to go. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Mysterious Spanish Tomb. A tomb from 5,400 years ago was recently discovered in Spain. It was found in the deep countryside nearest to the city of Antequera. The region is already famous for its ancient megaliths, home to dozens of prehistoric monuments carved out of stone. But what has researchers really excited about the new tomb is that it has a connection to the cosmos.
On the summer solstice, the rising sun shines light directly into the door of the tomb. It's like turning on a light switch. The chamber deep inside is lit up brilliantly, but only for a moment.
Once the sun passes its zenith, the phenomenon is over.
And amazingly, there's another tomb with an identical feature. It too is lit up by the rising sun every summer solstice.
The other tomb is called Newgrange, and it's located in Ireland, over 1,000 miles from the tomb in Spain. It's a huge mystery because the people who built Newgrange 5,000 years ago clearly had similar beliefs to those who built the Spanish tomb 400 years earlier. But were they the same people? Or did they coincidentally build similar tombs to catch the sunrise? Unfortunately, we may never know the truth. Sacrifices in ancient Pompeii. Archaeologists excavating the ruins of the Temple of Isis in Pompeii found something incredibly disturbing. They uncovered a ritual banquet in which dozens of birds had been consumed. The experts aren't sure what was happening here 2,000 years ago, but they think they have a solid idea. All signs point to a bizarre ceremony that took place in the temple to appease the goddess. Chiara Corbino from Italy's Institute of Heritage Science says the ritual was likely performed in a single day by 3 priests. It may have been to atone for a series of renovations that left the Temple of Isis smaller than it used to be. Because the ancient priests wouldn't have risked being on the wrong end of Isis's wrath, they sacrificed dozens of birds and ate their flesh as an offering. Isis was the goddess of healing and magic in ancient Egypt. She was adopted by the Greeks, and the Romans stole her too. The mystery of how the cult spread from Egypt across the Roman Empire is a baffling one. Greece and Rome typically had their own gods to deal with, but somehow, a group of zealots managed to spread the worship of Isis to the deepest corners of the empire. This would have been around the 1st century BC, right before the birth of Christ and the end of cults in the ancient world. Ireland's elite warriors. In medieval Ireland, there was a mysterious and fearsome group of warriors known only as the Gallowglass Mercenaries. The fighters were known for wearing chainmail and wielding battle axes, and they were supposedly the most formidable and coveted mercenary force on the island. But where exactly did they come from? It's believed the first Gallowglass arrived in Ireland from Scotland around 1259 AD. We have a written account of a group of mercenaries being included in the wedding dowry of Dugald MacSorley's daughter. We know they were real and that they fought in Scotland for years. And once they arrived in Ireland, they began working as bodyguards. They protected the chieftains of clans like Ulster and North Connaught in the 13th century, and the Gallowglass warriors were often paid to prevent the expansion of Anglo-Normans in Ireland. Most accounts agree that the Gallowglass weren't fussy about who they worked for. They could be hired by anybody who had the money to pay. For example, 2 mercenary groups fought each other at the Battle of Knockdoe in 1504. 2 different groups had been hired by either side, resulting in one of the bloodiest battles in Irish history. Historians think the mercenaries were likely descendants of Norse settlers in Scotland who mixed with the locals. Over the centuries, they lost much of their heritage, but still had Viking blood. They didn't vanish until the 17th century, when England became too powerful to be combated by a ragtag group of hired soldiers. Where did Mesopotamia come from? Mesopotamia wasn't a single civilization. When historians say Mesopotamia, they are referring to the region in what is today Iraq and Kuwait, along the borders of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It began about 8,000 years ago with the development of agriculture. Regular floods contributed to fertile soil along the banks of the river, which allowed early humans to irrigate crops and form cities. While this happened in other places of the world, like ancient Egypt and ancient China, it happened with a little more force in Mesopotamia. It's called the cradle of civilization because the most influential empires emerged here, including the Assyrian, Sumerian, Babylonian, and Akkadian empires. The first real civilization was Sumer, which took root in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago. They became the dominant urban civilization on the planet. They developed one of the first written scripts, and over time their language became so popular that it was used by everyone in the region until the Phoenicians came up with their own language about 2,000 years later. They built ships which allowed them to travel and spread, and they traded textiles and other goods with civilizations in India. They also worshipped a pantheon of anthropomorphic gods and built megalithic pyramids to honor them. This practice would go on to influence the entire world. The main religion branched into many, and eventually it would become the main influence for Judaism and Christianity. While the idea of Mesopotamia and the first civilization might seem mysterious, scientists believe they have it pretty much sorted out. There is, however, the conspiracy theory that the Sumerians were given great intelligence by extraterrestrial beings, but there's really no evidence. Unless you watch Ancient Aliens, then there's tons of evidence. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Ancient Babylon. Ancient Babylon was one of the most influential cities in Mesopotamia. This incredible place was the focal point of art, culture, and civilized society for 2,000 years. It was founded prior to 2000 BC on the edge of the Euphrates River, 60 miles from modern Baghdad in what is now Iraq. It was in the city of Babylon that a sophisticated system of law was formed and the first universal language was created. While there may have been other languages outside Babylon, Babylonian was learned all across the Middle East so that people could communicate across borders. It was an international language that helped facilitate trade and cross-kingdom cooperation. Babylon is most famous today for two of its most legendary features. First, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. If the stories are true, this ancient wonder was built by biblical king Nebuchadnezzar II to appease his wife. It was supposedly the most spectacular artificial garden in the world. The city was also home to the biblical Tower of Babel, which most archaeologists agree was in fact the ziggurat known as the Etemenanki. In ancient Sumerian, that means temple foundation of heaven and earth. Babylon truly was the center of civilized society up until about 1200 BC. That was when things got rocky, as they went to war with neighboring city-states like Assyria and Elam. Babylon was responsible for two brutal attacks on Jerusalem in the 6th century BC. The Babylonians even destroyed the first temple and allegedly stole the Ark of the Covenant. Their supremacy over the ancient world would finally come to an end when Alexander the Great captured the city in 331 BC. The city of Erbil. Erbil in Iraq is currently home to about 1.5 million people. But while this city has all the modern amenities you would expect, it is in fact very ancient. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, with its origins going back 8,000 years. The oldest part of the city is the ancient citadel at its center. At the very core of Erbil is a distinctly oval-shaped block of structures built over a raised earthen mound. The mound is at least 6,000 years old, yet the buildings on top of it come from the 19th and 20th centuries. The modern structures have prevented archaeologists from digging down to the layers of the ancient city. Because of this, all we really know about Erbil comes from ancient accounts. John McGuinness, an archaeologist with the University of Cambridge, says the existence of the city was little more than a hypothesis for years. Because there were no excavations, there was no way to officially declare an ancient city buried underneath the new one. But all of that has finally changed. For the first time in history, researchers just completed major excavations at the northern edge of the mound. They used ground-penetrating radar to identify a pair of huge stone structures underneath the center of the citadel. It's believed these structures might be the ruins of the original temples built at the city's core 2,500 years ago. One of them could be the Temple of Ishtar, dedicated to the Assyrian goddess of love and war. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait a while for new excavations to reveal more secrets. But we still have the historical accounts to tell us the story of Erbil. It was the home of Assyrian kings up until Alexander the Great conquered it in 331 BC. Remember him? This city was also witness to 3 battles between the Romans and the Persians. It suffered an attack by Genghis Khan in the 13th century and was bludgeoned by cannons in the 18th century. Even just a few decades ago, the ancient city of Erbil was damaged by tanks belonging to Saddam Hussein. This city has been through a lot. And now for number 8. But first, it's shoutout time! I wanted to say a big thank you to Bama and Yellow Flossy 3 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about unbelievable places from history. Crocodilopolis. Crocodilopolis was ancient Egypt's city of the crocodile god. The Greeks literally called it Crocodile City because it was the center of worship for the Egyptian water god Sobek. Sobek was almost like the Egyptian equivalent of Poseidon from Greek mythology, only he was always depicted as a crocodile. The city was likely founded in the Old Kingdom, starting sometime around 2686 BC. When the city was first occupied, it was known to the Egyptians as Shadet. Built on the shores of Lake Karun in the Fayum Oasis, Shadet benefited from fertile lands, plenty of water, and a seemingly abundant supply of crops. The city inhabitants believed their prosperity was because of their dedication to Sobek. This caused the cult to flourish, and at some point they started worshipping a very real crocodile. Egyptian cult worship was something truly spectacular. Shadet was home to the divine crocodile called Petsukos, or the son of Sobek. Petsukos would be dressed in gold and gems and kept in a special pond inside its temple. The divine crocodile was fed by priests whose only job was to keep the beast happy. Whenever the crocodile died, it would be replaced by a new one. The oasis city continued to prosper, and under control of the Greeks in the 4th century BC, it took on the name Crocodilopolis. Much like the city of Erbil, Crocodilopolis never died. It still exists today as the modern city of Fayum, with all traces of the crocodile cult hidden under the shifting sands. If you worshipped an animal as a god, what animal would you choose, and why? Let me know in the comments below. The Svan Blood Revenge Towers. In the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia's northern border, there is a historical region called Svaneti. It's part of the modern province of Ushguli, but its history goes back many thousands of years. The Svan are a group of ethnic Georgians who speak their own language, a language which happens to have no written alphabet. They date back to 1900 BC and have been living the same lifestyle for centuries. Starting around the 8th century AD, the Svan began building fortified tower dwellings called koshki. These things speckle the mountains and can be found scattered in the wilderness. Hundreds of them built on ridges, in the woods, and on isolated hilltops. They serve to protect small family groups from raiders and during times of blood feuds. The most recent koshki were made in the 18th century. Most of them are abandoned, but many are in almost perfect condition and still used today. You might be curious about the blood feuds. There is an ancient feudal system of blood revenge that is still practiced by the Svan today. This ancient custom is fairly simple. If someone insults another person, the person offended by the insult retaliates with murder. They either murder the person who insulted them or a male member of their family. After somebody dies, the family of the murder victim is then able to retaliate against the other family. The blood feud cycle has then begun and essentially never ends. Even though there are only 30,000 ethnic Svan left in Georgia, blood feuds still permeate their society to this day. Mukawir. The fortress of Mukawir lies in ruins at the top of a hill overlooking the vast and desolate Dead Sea. Its perch is roughly 3,000 feet above sea level. Giving it such an impressive vantage, it's no surprise that it was used as a military outpost. Around 90 BC, King Alexander Genesis of the Hasmoneans ordered a fortress to be built on the strategic hilltop to prevent invasions. But seeing the invasion coming, it didn't do much to save the Hasmoneans. The fortress was destroyed in 57 BC, and this would be the end of days for the Hasmonean dynasty. If you're familiar with the Bible, you'll recognize the Hasmoneans as the ruling party of Judea starting around 140 BC. They were descendants of the Maccabee family, but their rule only lasted about 80 years. The kingdom briefly regained some lost boundaries, only to be decimated and wiped out. The fortress of Mukawir was rebuilt by Herod the Great in 30 BC, 7 years after the defeat of the Hasmoneans. It was inside the rebuilt Mukawir fortress that John the Baptist was imprisoned before he was beheaded. Then came the Romans. In 72 AD, during the full-out Roman assault on the Jews of what would become Israel, the fortress was destroyed. It was obliterated, with nothing left except scraps from its foundations. These foundations were discovered briefly in 1807, but not excavated until 1968. Ethiopia's Camelot, Fasil Gebi. In the Middle Ages, Ethiopian emperors practiced the tradition of traveling around the countryside with all of their belongings. They would live off whatever the peasants gave them and live in small, easily portable tent cities. There would be entire imperial camps where emperors lived. Then, in the 17th century, Emperor Fasilides broke with tradition. Instead of progressing through the territories of Ethiopia as the royal nomad, he built a city. He founded the legendary city of Gondar and made it his capital. In that capital was built what many have called Ethiopia's Camelot, the Fasil Gebi. Hassan ibn Ahmad al-Haymi was a traveler from Yemen who detailed his adventures and the places he saw. He visited the emperor's stone castle in 1648, very soon after its construction. He learned that the architect was an Indian stonemason who went by the name Abd al-Karim. Hassan described the castle as an outstanding wonder, a marvelous house of stone and lime. The emperor truly enjoyed living a stable existence. The emperors who came after did too. In 1696, it was claimed there were 80 royal children running around indiscriminately on the castle grounds. The imperial compound soon birthed a thriving city around it. But nothing lasts forever. The emperors of Ethiopia vanished, and today the castle, while still standing, is a sad shell of its former self. China's lost water city. Archaeologists in China recently excavated the ruins of what's being called an ancient water city. This mysterious city was built an estimated 2,500 years ago in Jiangsu province. The Wuxiabang ruins were uncovered just a few miles from one of the biggest freshwater lakes in the country, Lake Taihu. The city may have once looked like a primitive version of Italy's Venice. Researchers say the corners of the city were connected by waterways. Instead of getting from one place to another using solid roads, the citizens used small boats to paddle through the watery avenues. When they wanted to visit a friend, they got in their boat and paddled up to their front door. The city contained 3 main areas. Archaeologists uncovered an inner city, an outer city, and the outskirts. They say the inner city was protected by tall walls and an impressive moat. This was likely where the elite members of society lived, while the peasant class was out on the outskirts. The outer city was likely home to the working class, people who had enough money to have their own boats and their own small dwellings. Would you like to live in a city built on water? Let me know in the comments. Sapharang. Sapharang is a ruined city that sits on top of a rock formation deep in the remote wilderness of western Tibet. It was once the capital of the little-known Guj Kingdom, which emerged in the 10th century AD. At the time, there was a major trading route cutting through the vast Tibetan landscape. A group of locals got together and decided to control that trading route. They built themselves a city, then grew bloated from the wealth they extracted from all those trying to move through the region. They were bridge keepers, controlling the flow of traffic in and out of the Garuda Valley. Even today, the ruins of the city are breathtaking. Ruined houses, rough stone walls, destroyed temples, hollow palaces, and Buddhist sanctuaries are all falling to pieces on the rock formation. Sapharang was built like a stone honeycomb at the peak of a mountain. There are even mysterious tunnels that were carved by Tibetan Buddhist hermits, winding like the corridors of an ant's nest underneath the forsaken town. Things didn't go too well for the Guj Kingdom. Jesuit missionaries stumbled across the city around 1624. They asked King Tritashi Drakpa if they could build a Jesuit church and convert the locals, and the king said yes. This enraged his subjects, who then overthrew him in 1630. The royal family was taken captive and the kingdom fell into its death spiral. A central Tibetan government then showed up in the late 17th century, and Sapharang was conquered. The city fell into obscurity, only to be destroyed by the Chinese Red Guard in the 1960s. The Kanchi Kailasanathar Temple. In the Indian state of Tamil Nadu stands a magnificent temple that's supposedly the oldest thing in the city. The Kanchi Kailasanathar temple was built in the 8th century as a place of worship for Lord Shiva. The name itself translates to Lord of the Cosmic Mountain. The temple is an amazing piece of architecture, but the story behind it is even more fascinating. It was built in Kanchipuram, one of the 7 sacred cities of Hinduism. The city was chosen by the powerful Pallava dynasty to be a sacred metropolis in the 3rd century. The Pallavas soon used Kanchipuram as their capital, while they lorded over a massive chunk of southern India. They ruled Kanchipuram up until the 9th century AD, when the Chalukyas showed up and defeated them. Chola ruler Aditya I brought the hammer down in 897, ending 600 years of dominance. That was longer than the original Roman Empire was around. It's believed Pallava ruler Rajasima Pallaveswaram was the one who commissioned the construction of the temple. He ruled in the first half of the 8th century. The temple is now the only major structure still standing from the days when Kanchipuram was the capital. The megalithic builders. Archaeologists in France recently uncovered a fortified compound from 6,300 years ago. The ancient residential site likely belonged to some of the first megalithic builders in Europe. These may have been the very first human beings in Europe to make massive monuments out of stone. They were Neolithic men and women who handcrafted some of the first dolmens, barrows, and other large stone structures. The team of researchers identified an ancient enclosure in southwestern France called Le Pou as the home of the early builders. The site was discovered during a recent aerial survey. 3 ruined buildings constructed on a hilltop. Archaeologists then got boots on the ground and may have been working on excavations ever since. Now, scientists have finally gotten enough information to reveal the details of the settlement. Dr. Vincent Ard from the French National Center for Scientific Research says the people who lived here put a lot of effort into protecting themselves. Researchers found the remains of palisade walls. The settlement was protected by a thick marsh, and they built strong wooden structures. The villagers even had a defensive ditch and what may have been watchtowers. The settlement was discovered near a prehistoric cemetery with some of the oldest barrow tombs in the world. Forget about Mesopotamia. Small settlements like the Pou were where civilization really got started. The mystery of Shiprock. Near the city of Shiprock, New Mexico, there is a strange rock formation, also called Shiprock. It's in the middle of an empty wasteland, a desert of scrub plants and lizards basking in the sun. Hundreds of years ago, the land was populated by the Pueblo people, prehistoric Native Americans, also known as the Anasazi. To them, Shiprock was a sacred place. The Navajo believed the gigantic rock represented a bird that carried their ancestral people on its back from the heavens to the earth. The bird touched down at the exact location of Shiprock. The ancestors of the Navajo climbed down from its back, and then the bird immediately turned to stone. In the Navajo language, Shiprock is called Se-bi-ai, which means rock with wings. It was named Shiprock by the Europeans who arrived in the 19th century and thought the formation looked a little like a ship, but technically it should be called a bird rock. In any case, geologists don't believe in the legends. Science tells us the rock formed about 27 million years ago. It's actually what's left of a long-forgotten volcano. Over millions of years, the volcano eroded, melting into the flat landscape. The only thing that remains today is the rock rising 1,500 feet above the wind-swept desert. Before Europeans arrived, the rock was a forbidden place to the Navajo people. They first lived at the rock's peak, only venturing into the flatlands to toil in the fields or get water. But then came a massive lightning storm, which forced the Navajo down from the rock, and they never returned. This is all according to the stories passed down through generations. Science tells us the rock definitely is not a petrified bird, but that doesn't mean there isn't some truth to the story. It could be that the ancestors of the Navajo, the people who came even before the Anasazi, arrived in New Mexico on the back of something. If it wasn't a great bird, maybe it was a ship that dumped them in this inhospitable desert. Just kidding. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Kathleen Garcia and No Name No Last Name for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for for more videos about conspiracies from ancient history. The Orion Cube. Dan Burish was born in California in 1964. He studied microbiology at the University of Las Vegas, graduated in 1986, then studied a bit more in New York. He would grow up to be the youngest member of the Microbiology Society of Los Angeles, and in the late 1980s received a mysterious visit from government agents. None of this has ever been confirmed as fact, so take the conspiracy here with a grain of salt. But according to Dan's story, he was approached by men in military uniform and asked to work on a secret project. He worked on several different projects, then a few years later was transferred to Area 51, where he began to work on Project Aquarium. This is where things get strange. Dan allegedly learned that the military was in possession of extraterrestrial ships and the aliens who piloted them. These beings were called Orions and supposedly came from the star system Z Reticuli. Among the myriad of ships kept in Area 51 was the same vessel that crashed in Roswell in 1947. During his work at Area 51, Dan learned that the alien beings are not creatures from another planet, but a distant form of human evolution from thousands of years in the future. He was apparently one of the people responsible for taking blood samples of the beings and studying them. Dan also learned that the beings had given a mysterious cube to President Eisenhower capable of predicting the future. The artifact is called the Orion Cube and has supposedly been changing hands ever since. It passes between the rich and powerful, allows them to get brief glimpses into the future, and they use it to accumulate more and more wealth. Dan's story is extremely unreliable and there isn't a sliver of evidence to back it up, but many people do believe in the theory that aliens are more advanced humans from another place in the universe. Some even think we were left here on Earth by our own kind thousands of years ago, and that one day they will come back to see how we're doing. Maybe that's got something to do with the Navajo story of being dropped off in the desert on the back of a big bird. Do you believe Dan's story? Let me know in the comments. The Stone Soldiers of the Inca. In 1438, the Inca fought an epic battle against their rivals, the Chanca, for domination of ancient Peru. According to Inca legend, they used stone soldiers to win that battle. Yes, stone soldiers like animated golems. They were called the Pururaucas. And although the Inca weren't able to write down the recipe for these stone soldiers since they didn't have a written language, they never stopped telling the story. It trickled down through generations of oral folklore, and we're still talking about it today. But did the Inca really create stone soldiers to help win their fight against the Chanca? And if so, why didn't they do it again to fight the Spanish? If the myth is to be believed, the Inca were not in complete control over the constructs. The story says that when the Inca faced off against the Chanca in the Battle of Pampa, these stone warriors suddenly came to life to help. What's really interesting is that in the Quechua language of the ancient Andean people, Pururaucas means unconquerable enemies. This seems to suggest the Inca knew about these stone warriors and that they were undefeatable, but not how to control them. They gave credit to the god of creation, Viracocha, for bringing the stone warriors to life. It's hard to identify which aspects are myth and which aspects are truth. We know the Chanca and the Inca were arch enemies in the 15th century. In 1428, the army of the Chanca conquered the city of Cusco with an army of 50,000 soldiers. Prince Kusi managed to escape and rally a small force of rebels to fight back. However, we don't know how they won the battle. It could have been a guerrilla warfare situation, with the Inca making it seem as if their army was bigger than it really was. They may have tricked the Chanca into believing they had manifested an army of stone soldiers, or who knows, maybe their god really did send them animated constructs. Whatever the case, the victory over the Chanca was the first step to establishing the Inca Empire. Alien paintings. In India's Bastar region, there is a collection of rock paintings that date back 10,000 years. The paintings are remarkable for one main reason. They depict alien creatures and unidentified flying objects. It's a little astounding because, according to local archaeologist J.R. Bhagat, the paintings are almost identical to the aliens shown in the most popular sci-fi movies, and yet they were created by an unknown culture inside a series of caves near a remote village 100 centuries ago. J.R. Bhagat says the paintings prove beyond any doubt that humans witnessed alien beings from other planets during prehistoric times. It's easy enough to say, but not all experts are convinced. Most mainstream archaeologists argue the images are expressions of a healthy imagination. The inhuman figures more than likely aren't aliens, but ordinary humans who look coincidentally like astronauts from another dimension. This is one of those instances where it's impossible to disprove the conspiracy or prove what the mainstream archaeologists are saying. We can't ask the artists since they've been dead for 10,000 years. All we have are interpretations of the images, and to be honest, they do look like aliens. Locals in the region even worship the paintings for many years. They still speak of tales passed down from their ancestors of the Roela people. These were small humans who used to come down from the sky and take 1 or 2 people from their village back up into the heavens with them. It sounds an awful lot like intergalactic kidnapping, but we can't say for sure if the stories are true. The Lost Secrets of Siberia. In northern Russia, the Yakutia region is similar in its vastness and unexplored depths as the wilds of Alaska. The land here is inhospitable, covered in bogs and icy swamps, and steeped in controversial mysteries. Locals refer to this great expanse of wilderness as the Valley of Death. There are tales of unexplained disappearances, metallic spheres in the sky, and unsolvable mysteries. One of those mysteries is the Tunguska explosion of 1908. That was when an unknown object exploded in the sky above the tundra, leveled the trees, and inflicted damage like a nuclear blast. It was later blamed on an exploding meteorite, but many think it had something to do with alien visitors. Similar catastrophic events occurred in 1984 and 2002. In 1984, there were a series of munitions fires that resulted in devastating explosions, killing about 300 people in the middle of nowhere. The New York Times reported that it was an accident involving munitions and that most of the dead were ordnance technicians sent into the fire to defuse the situation. But many believe it was another event like the explosion in 1908, and the Russian government covered it up. There was a similar event on September 25, 2002. A massive explosion was detected in the Irkutsk Oblast, similar in power and ferocity to the Tunguska explosion. Witnesses saw a fireball, felt the force of the explosion, and again, the event was blamed on a meteorite. Conspiracy theorists think there is something else going on in Siberia, and that the explosions could be from UFOs entering or leaving the atmosphere. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The Comet Hypothesis. The Clovis Comet hypothesis is less of a conspiracy and more of a wild speculation. There are some experts out there who believe that 12,850 years ago, a giant asteroid crashed into the planet, wreaking havoc. The space debris likely hit North America, maybe even breaking apart and smashing into various parts of the globe. Where it landed doesn't really matter. The consequences are the same. It's believed this asteroid caused a chain of events that decimated human civilization. The comet led to the extinction of major Pleistocene megafauna, including animals like the mastodon, saber-toothed tiger, the giant ground sloth, and more. It also wiped out the Clovis culture and potentially the civilization of Atlantis. One of the most prominent believers in the theory is scientist Martin Sweatman from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He and his team allegedly discovered high levels of platinum in North America and Greenland, where they think pieces of the asteroid hit. Platinum is evidence of an extremely high temperature event, the result of a great explosion that generated so much heat it created nanodiamonds. The physical evidence does seem to be there, although the theory still hasn't really caught on. Research suggests something significant did happen 12,850 years ago. We see a great event memorialized at Göbekli Tepe, a place often called the world's first temple. We also know that global flood myths date back to that same time period, including the biblical myth of the Great Flood and an older myth in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Countless ancient civilizations spoke of a world-altering event 13,000 years ago, give or take a few decades. The dating also coincides with the sudden destruction of Atlantis. Scholars are wary of accepting the truth of a catastrophic event that changed the world, yet the historical records seem to support the conspiracy theorists on this one. If true, it could mean the Bible was right. There really was a flood, and it could also mean Atlantis was real, and that it did sink because of an asteroid. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear. The Civil War pterosaur. Conspiracy theorists love to talk about cryptozoology. The Loch Ness Monster is secretly a marine reptile from 250 million years ago. Bigfoot is really a human ancestor hiding in the North American wilderness. There is also a sauropod allegedly living in the Congo named Mokele Mbembe. None of this has ever been proven, but that doesn't stop people from believing in them. And this brings us to the pterosaur, supposedly killed by soldiers of the Union Army during the American Civil War of the 1860s. Unlike the Loch Ness Monster, we have a picture of the prehistoric flying reptile. The photo has been circulating for years, with nobody able to determine whether it's real or fake. The photograph in question shows a group of soldiers standing victoriously around the corpse of a dinosaur, a flying reptile with a wingspan of about 20 feet that should have gone extinct 66 million years ago. The photograph is tenuous evidence at best. We don't have a story or any eyewitness testimonies, just a photograph. But the presence of a flying dinosaur fits very nicely with ancient legends from North America. Many Native American tribes believed in something called the Thunderbird, a mythical beast whose description fits exactly with the physical appearance of an extinct pterosaur. Tribes from the Pacific Northwest believed the Thunderbird made thunder by flapping its wings, and lightning came from it flashing its eyes. These stories are so similar and so prevalent across North America, it's hard to imagine the Thunderbird wasn't a real animal. Perhaps there was a line of pterosaurs that survived the extinction of the rest of the dinosaurs, and the Native Americans knew about it. Then, unbeknownst to the rest of the world, the Union Army shot and killed the last one. Ancient Anunnaki handbags. On the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, an ancient temple built 13,000 years ago by an impossibly advanced civilization, there are images of gods holding what appear to be handbags. These same images are seen on stone reliefs in ancient Assyria and in stonework created by the Olmec culture of Mesoamerica. The Olmec were the precursors to the Maya, one of the first advanced societies in the Western Hemisphere. In almost every corner of the globe, we can find ancient gods adorning the walls of temples and ruins, many of them holding the exact same handbag. So what's the deal with that? And what does this mysterious handbag represent? It might not be a purse, even though that's exactly what it looks like. Sometimes it looks a bit like a bucket, maybe a basket, but it's always a god holding some kind of bag-like object. Some experts have suggested it has nothing to do with a bag. Instead, the semicircular handle represents the hemisphere of the sky, while the solid base represents the planet, and thus the image would mean something along the lines of a unified earth and sky, or to go even deeper, the bond between material and immaterial forms of existence. The Assyrians of ancient Iraq carved images of their gods holding handbags around 880 BC. The Olmecs of Mesoamerica created the same thing between 1200 and 400 BC. The ones at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey date back to 11,000 BC. In New Zealand, the Maori worship the symbol of the handbag as a representation of the divine knowledge bestowed upon them by the gods. Some believe the handbags represent a gift given to all these different cultures by the very real gods who came down from the sky, the same gods who shared the knowledge needed to create civilization. Then again, it could all just be a wild coincidence. What do you think the handbag/basket object is? Let me know in the comments. The Stone of Destiny. Nobody knows where the Stone of Scone, also called the Stone of Destiny, came from. One theory is that it came from the Holy Land after the death of Christ. It traveled through Spain, Ireland, and then made it to Scone in Scotland in the 9th century. Others believe the stone has nothing to do with the Holy Land and has always been in Scotland. Another possibility is that the stone was taken from a Roman altar at the Antonine Wall and transported to Scone. There's enough confusion that we have no idea where the stone came from. Despite its mystery, the stone has been used in the coronation of kings for over 1,000 years. Even King Charles III has just welcomed the Stone of Scone to London in late April 2023 and used the ancient artifact for his coronation. Did you know that? But just what in the world is this mythical stone? It's a block of sandstone previously kept in the ruins of Scone Abbey. It was traditionally used in the coronation ceremonies of Scotland's monarchs. But in 1296, King Edward I stole the stone when he invaded Scotland. Then it was used in the coronation of the English monarchs and the monarchs of Great Britain in general and the UK that followed. In 1996, after approximately 700 years, the British government finally agreed to return the stone to Scotland. It was taken to Edinburgh Castle and kept alongside the Scottish crown jewels. There isn't much ceremony to be had with the stone. New monarchs just sit on it during their coronation. When it was taken back to England in the 13th century, King Edward fitted the stone into a wooden chair that became known as the coronation chair. But even after all these years, the origins of the stone are still nothing but myth and rumor. One story is that Fergus, son of Urk and first king of the Scots, stole the stone from the Irish in the 5th century. It was supposedly used at the Hill of Tara by the High Kings of Ireland to coronate their kings going back hundreds of years. And if we keep going back, the stone was supposedly used in biblical days. Many believe it to be the stone of Jacob, which appears in the book of Genesis as the stone Jacob used as a pillow. For being a stone, it's getting a lot of love. Transforming monks. Everywhere in ancient history, we see how meditation and enlightenment have extraordinary effects on the human body. Buddhists call it the rainbow body. The Islamic mystics call it the supra-celestial body. Tantric teachings call it the divine body. And in the ancient Mithraic religion, it was known as the perfect body. There are dozens of different names for it, but it's all the same thing. The ancient mystical religions teach that when a monk enters the final state of enlightenment, the effect is so powerful that their physical form transcends the shackles of the human body and they dissolve into pure light. It sounds like magic, but could there be truth to it? There have supposedly been thousands of documented cases of monks transforming into a pure burst of light as their body disintegrates. It's never been captured on film, and scientists say it's nothing but nonsense. But there are some scraps of evidence. Outside Asura Cave in Nepal is the alleged handprint of Padmasambhava, an ancient tantric master and Buddhist mystic of the 8th century. The handprint was supposedly left in the rock during his final moments of physical life. When he transformed into light energy, the transformation was so intense, it left his handprint seared into the rock. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you'd like to see a part 2. See you next time. Bye!